Well, good morning. Thank you for coming here. I would not blame you if you didn't come here. If you've looked at a newspaper or watched the television the last 10 or 15 years, you'd have lots of reasons not to come to Washington, D.C. Congress is rightly viewed as ridiculously partisan, gridlocked, petty, infighting, and getting very little in the way done. So I suggest you just go home. Just go home. Actually, as Mary alluded to, there's a very good reason for you to be here right now. And I want to talk a little bit about that, and a little bit from the perspective of someone who did serve in Congress. I started out as I graduated from college in 1973, and my hair was down here, and I was going to save the world, and I made a commitment to service of some kind. I started out as a house parent working with physically and mentally challenged children. I was a social worker working with abused and neglected children. I ran for office because I was tired of the way the state was treating abused children. And so when after 24 years in elective office, when I was given the opportunity to come run BIO, which is the trade association, and in some degrees the lobbying organization for the biotechnology industry, I really had to think hard about that and to just decide whether it was public service, because it sounded like I was, and some people accused me of selling out, going to the dark side. As I looked at the organization, its mission, and I realized its motto was that we want to heal, fuel, and feed the world. And recognizing that of all of the parents who brought all of the kids and their loved ones into my office for all the time I held office, and brought them in wheelchairs and brought them in and said, this kid is sick, there's no cure, what can you do? I usually said, I'll put more money into NIH, and I was pretty faithful to that. But I didn't really understand what it took in total to bring new treatments and cures for these diseases. And as I thought about the opportunity to help the industry get that done, I felt good about it. I felt that it was public service, and I continue to feel very good about it. And what I've learned very quickly is that these companies, these 900 companies, I represent all of the big pharmaceutical companies. We at Bio do all the big companies, but overwhelmingly hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little startup companies that are just trying to find a cure for something. A lot of these companies were started by doctors who grew frustrated with that because there were no treatments, or some of them have loved ones with diseases and started their own companies for that purpose. And what I realized is they might have the most brilliant scientists in the world, and they do. They might have the most incredible entrepreneurial skills. Good businessmen and women know how to go out and raise money and keep a business going long enough to try to make the science work. But if the public policy under which they operate isn't conducive to the enterprise succeeding, it fails. And most of these companies do fail. Most of these projects fail. You know that. You've watched that. It's a very difficult thing to do. And the policy has to include funding the NIH. The policy has to include giving grants to small companies to start up. It has to include good ways for universities to transfer technology into the private sector. It has to include the right tax policy, the right intellectual property policy to protect the patents that are developed. It has to have the FDA has to work right on behalf of patients. And reimbursement, the toughest issue of all, has to be right. Companies have to be paid well for their products, or no one will invest in the companies in order to create new ones. So all of that has to be right, and it has to be pretty much seamless. And so what our organization does is we're on the Hill at the state level and here in Washington and around the world all the time pleading for the right policy. Now, no matter how well-intentioned and noble we think we are, people look at us and, well, you're in business, right? So you're doing this to make money, right? So we're going to look at you a little askance. We're going to question your motives a bit because your profit is part of your motive. And so we can only be so convincing. That's not the case when you walk in the office of a member of Congress. You are seen as having no motive other than to make sure that your kid or your wife or your son or your mother gets better. And so no one will question your motives. So you have a very unique and powerful mission here. Now, the reason I think that you shouldn't be frustrated with the normal business as usual, do nothing environment here is because of something called the 21st Century Cures Act. And have you talked about that this morning a little bit? Okay. Just let me give you my quick view on why I think it's likely to succeed. There's a guy named Fred Upton, who's the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I've known Fred for 22 years. He's a very dear friend of mine. He's what I am. He's one of these old-fashioned centrist, moderate Republicans, not ideological right-wingers or left-wingers. Just came here to try to get stuff done. And he's been here for a very long time, and this is probably going to be his last term. He's the chairman of the committee. And when he got the chairmanship of the committee, and it wasn't easy because he was a moderate Republican, they gave him the gavel and they said, okay, Mr. Chairman, the purpose of this gavel is to bash Obamacare until we tell you to stop. And so all of the bills that have been, going nowhere except been passed hundreds of times in the House to repeal Obamacare has had to go through his committee. Well, I think, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think, I know him well enough to go, before I leave this place, I'd like to get something done, something really important done. And thank God he decided that with all of the jurisdiction of the Energy and Commerce Committee, the thing he wanted to get done is he wanted to accelerate the discovery and the development and the delivery of new life science products to patients. And I love him for deciding that that's the thing he wants to do for purposes of his legacy and to feel good that he's got something done. And then he did two things that were really indicative of the kind of guy he is. The first thing he said is, this is going to be completely bipartisan. I will put nothing in here that divides Republicans and Democrats broadly on ideological grounds. So nothing is going to be in here that's about repealing Obamacare. It's all about things that are positive to get the ball moving. And he said, he picked Diane DeGette, a long-term Democrat on the committee, said, I want you to be my partner, talk to the Republican leadership, the Democratic leadership, and said, let's get this thing done. The next thing he did is, instead of just sort of turning to a think tank in Washington, which policymakers often do, say, well, what do you think we should do? He said, I'm going to spend a year listening to people who actually know what to do. And he spent a year listening to patients, listening to Francis Collins from the NIH and the leadership at the FDA, and the patient groups and doctors and industry, and said, you tell us what frustrates you. You tell us what we need to do, and we'll put it in a bill. And he's done that. He's put it in a draft document. It's just a draft. They're going to continue to work on it until they build something over the next several weeks that is purely, really, truly bipartisan and really solid. So I think because of the way he's going to go about this, this has a very good chance of happening. And I believe it will be a milestone in the history of medical advancement that is it's included in this bill. This bill is going to be a big deal, I think. And so I encourage you to talk about it on the Hill. Don't be afraid of these guys. I mean, it's a frustrating thing. You go up there and you'll have a meeting scheduled with the congressman, and the bells will go off, and he has a vote, or she has a vote, and they run off, and you're talking to staff, and sometimes the members are looking at their watch or they're looking at the ceiling, and they don't know what you're talking about. But they work for you. You don't work for them. You pay their salary. They don't pay yours. So keep that in mind. Be respectful. But you have a right to ask them questions. Ask them if they know about this thing. Ask them what they think about it. And what's very important is when you go in there, if you know exactly the kinds of things you're asking for, specific things, start with that. Congressman, we're here to ask you for X. Then tell your story. Because if you just walk in and start telling your story, what they're thinking the whole time is, what do they want? I don't know what they want. So tell them what you want. Tell them why you need it. And I think you'll find it a great experience, and I think you'll find that it will pay off. So thank you for having me. Thank you for being here, and I guess we'll take some questions.